Hello, I'm Joan Brown. It's my great pleasure to host this segment of the Marin Women's Hall of Fame show. Since 1987, the Hall of Fame has inducted over 140 Marin women of distinction, women who have made immense contributions to the County of Marin and its residents, as well as to the world beyond. Honorees have distinguished themselves in many fields: education, science, business, philanthropy, the arts, politics, law, philosophy, religion, and more. Each honoree has been a force for positive change in our community. It is a great privilege to acknowledge and document their contributions. Today, it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Eva Long, who's being honored in 2020 for her remarkable work in education. So welcome.
Thank you.
And let's begin with the really amazing story of your father coming to America and his marrying, etc.
Well, it's my pleasure to tell the untold story because I don't have many opportunities to do that. So I'm just thrilled to be here, and thank you so much for shepherding me through the induction process. My story is not unlike many immigrants today. So my mother and father, as individuals, my father came at a very young age. And if I were to guess, he was between 15 and 17 years old.
And did he come alone?
He came alone, and that took a lot of courage. And so when he came here as a U.S. Merchant, and those were the jobs that they needed at the time. So he started working in the U.S. and then was in Sacramento to begin with, and then the Bay Area. As a result of that, he earned enough funds over probably 10 or 15 years to be able to return to China, and that was his only trip back to China, was to
Canton?
Canton, to visit with my mother, who soon to be his wife. And so in some ways it was arranged by families, and that's how they would do it in the villages to make sure that, it's common experience as well as language. And so when he went back and married her, she was already a doctor, ran a little hospital in Canton, for which I had the privilege of visiting.
Oh, how great
on
is
my
that?
roots trip, and that was very, very, special for me. And so he returned, and unbeknownst to him, she was pregnant, and
but not with you.
No, with him. And as it turned out, my oldest sister was born, and my mother then continued working. Just like in today's world, she was way in advance of the modern woman, and became really a single mother with a child. And then 10 years later, she then was able to come to the U.S. With her family.
And the reason she couldn't come for 10 years was not because they didn't have the money, but because the U.S. was not accepting women from China as immigrants at that time. Is that right?
That's correct. For many years, only the merchants and the railroad employees would be able to come, but no women with them, no family.
Boy, that's tough.
It is.
That's a tough situation. So what was your childhood like?
Well, I consider myself very lucky that I had a pretty regular family. Our two parents, and I had 4 siblings, including myself, 3 daughters and 1 son. And so we grew up in Chinatown in Oakland. And then my older sisters both went off to college at UC Berkeley. My oldest sister, which was phenomenal, majored in business administration. Can you imagine? In the 1940s?
No. Good for her.
Yeah,
Good
right,
for her.
right. And I always wondered, did she do it so she could help my father, in his business? Yeah. And so it helped me with going through my history. Some things came up for me
Yeah,
that was
good.
very telling.
Yeah.
So I appreciated that. When my mother spent the 10 years in China as more than that, working in the hospital, when she migrated here, she spoke, I would say, what we call broken English. And she, even though she got her citizenship, went to citizenship and applied, passed the test and all of that, it was very challenging for her because she was, in her 40s when she first came here. Yeah.
So, what was it like growing up in Chinatown in Oakland? And did you feel that you faced any discrimination? And did you speak Cantonese or I guess
Long
Du at home, or English, or were you bilingual, or kind of what was that like?
Well, I was definitely bilingual, could speak the family language, the village language, so to speak. I also understood, maybe not as fluent in Cantonese. And so my brother and I spoke English whenever we could at home. And then my sisters would speak Chinese to the parents. And then my oldest sister was like a surrogate mother to me, the American mother.
Yeah. So you also mentioned that your mom ran a Chinese language school.
She did. So she wanted to be productive and, continue the culture and language. And so she ran a school, actually, in our home. And it was a Chinese language program.
So when you went to school your first day, what was that like?
Well, it was very memorable. I remember my mother taking me there. I didn't speak English. I may have been able to understand, but you're 4 years old, right? And so the kindergarten class kids were at the bottom of the stairs. I remember brick stairs, and the kids were all playing and so forth. And I stood there and I said to myself, this is not what I was expecting about going to school, and I'm having a difficult time. I probably couldn't even articulate it. But I remember I started crying because I looked out on the play yard and the children were playing. And I just couldn't even go down there to play. And then kindergarten teacher was a saint. She worked with my mother. My mother came, took me home, cried every day for whatever duration. And part of it was not understanding, maybe, and also being very scared.
And I think when we were talking earlier, you said that this teacher was one of your role models while you wanted to go into education.
Yes.
That's quite an impact for a kindergarten teacher to have. So as a young child, you were diagnosed with having a very rare bone disease. You had, excuse me, 2 very serious surgeries, a lot of recovery. You were homeschooled for several years. It was an extremely, extremely challenging childhood. How did it affect you then, and how has it influenced your outlook on life?
I think the first part is when you don't know anything, because you're young.
You just think everybody's at home in bed, right?
Right. But what was probably the most startling part was my brother has tonsils removed, and I was jealous because they gave him ice cream afterwards, right? And he would brag about the ice cream. So my first surgery was a knee surgery, and it was painful, and it had been, painful for many months and so forth. And I'll never forget that I was expecting ice cream.
And you didn't get it.
And I didn't get it. But it was, the contrast was something.
Yes.
Because I was not prepared as a child, 7 years old, for such a long recovery. And, and if it didn't work, it could have spread and, all kinds of things like that. Then my second surgery was even worse because, anesthesia and everything else. And so all of that kind of news is haunting, even the aftermath of the thing.
So had this 2-year convalescence, how did that influence your outlook on life?
Well, it certainly caused me to think a lot about whatever was going to happen. And then being very grateful that my mother and my sister were always there for me
Yeah.
and gave me shots and,
Quite a blessing.
yes.
So you are an advocate for education. You've served on the Marin College of Marin board for 21 years. So tell us about your own personal educational journey and why you place such a high value on education. So here's a kid who's crying, going to kindergarten, missed 2 years of the regular school, and has ended up, education has been your whole life. So can you briefly kind of tell us what that progression has been?
Well, in the Chinese culture, education is one of the most important values that people hold very high. And so with a mother
Right, who had an
actually-
MD.
yeah, right, could go on and, in that time of her life, could support herself and her baby was unusual. And so my mother, being the youngest, I'm the youngest of her 4 children, I think she wanted me to be more like her and had the time when the others were off to college and so forth. And I think she just kind of cultivated me in certain ways that maybe the other children did not have. But she wanted her children to aspire to
And did your father support that too?
very much so in terms of concept, but because he was always working. Where he was probably the best father was when he recognized that if I had a handicap that would be everlasting. He said to me when I was 14 years old, Saturday mornings, I'm going to take you and teach you how to drive. He never did that with the other children. And I was so blessed about that. And I think about the first time I got a job, he said, now, always put the money at the cashier on top, never put it away. And you count backwards. Now, they don't teach you that in school, right?
Yeah.
So he did things
So
like that.
this was in your father's grocery store?
No. This
Oh.
was going to work at Capitol's Emporium type of work. Yeah.
Yes, I remember them.
Yeah.
Okay. So your years on the College of Marin board, what do you think your biggest impacts have been there?
Well, it's interesting to kind of read what other people think, and so it was. I got a congratulatory letter because of the Hall of Fame, and they enumerated the things that I did, and I thought to myself, how do people know that? I mean, I don't talk about things like that.
Well, but now's the time.
Yeah, now's the time. And it was really interesting because I'm the only educator that's on the board and that has been on the board long term. And so I've probably, gone through and did administration as well and teaching at all levels. And so what I contribute is really the education understanding. And at the policy level, I'll tell you why I thought I wanted to be on the board. It was not about necessarily my education background. I wanted to know, what is it like to be a trustee?
Oh, interesting.
Isn't
So you're interested in the volunteer
Correct.
experience. That's
Right.
very interesting.
Isn't it?
That's very
yeah, and I
interesting
said
to
to
me.
myself, I see it from the other side,
Yeah.
As a superintendent
Right.
and as a teacher, but what is it really like?
That's
And then there were things about it that I knew I was at the right place to contribute as I did. And so it was like, I worked with facilities and how to get a bond measure, and where the board was just wringing their hands about, like, how do we do this? We can't improve our facilities. And the wise president of the board at the time said, after getting to know some of the new board members, he said, I want Eva to be on this committee for facilities and new facilities for the college. So that's how I got on and was able to contribute. And also my curriculum background, very often I can help change, and with changing populations of students and community, it was fortuitous for me to be able to at least contribute
Right.
very significantly in those areas.
So you also mentioned the Summer Academy. What was that?
The Summer Academy is taking students who may be the first in their family to go to college, giving them the heavy information before they even get into college.
What's heavy information mean?
Meaning that English, in other words, if they can't pass the prerequisites for testing, as an example, or even the graduate or the exam that they have to do, we teach them all of the things about planning, about taking the courses, what the course of study is going to be, and so forth. So they get an infusion of what is real when they get into college, because many cultures do not value going that next level because they want them to go into the labor market.
Right, to
Yeah,
work.
yeah.
To work. So you are the founder and CEO of the Center for Longevity, Transition, and Renewal. When and why did you create that, and what does it do?
Okay. So 25 years ago, it's about the time that when I left the superintendency and told the board that I needed to go home, my husband had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and I always knew that when the time was going to be, I would know it, that I would get off the fast track, and I knew that I would need to return home. And home was Marin. So as it turned out, little did I know the life transition I would be making. I mean, your brain will tell you something, but you're never ready with all the emotions and family and so forth.
Right.
So it really was the beginning of the end, so to speak, that when my mother died, I took it very seriously, as I should, because we were very bonded. And then when my brother died, the same year that my husband died, and then my sister had this massive stroke that she never walked or talked ever again
Eva.
for 5 years. Those were responsibilities that I had at the time. And it got to a point where I said to myself, now how do you deal with that much grief, that much change in your life? And so I was stretching, stretching. And my mentor from Washington, D.C. called me up and said, Eva, there's a job in San Francisco that I'd like you to, consider. And she said, I've talked to the person, you're just the perfect person for it. And I said to myself, I don't think so. I'm on sabbatical. And I really wanted to preserve the time, self-reflection and so forth. So that was the inspiration for me to look at lifelong learning. But there was nothing about lifelong learning. I then said, okay, if it's not lifelong learning, what is it? Well, maybe it's longevity. Like, why do people live a long time? Now, there was more research about that. So I looked into longevity, and then I had the good fortune to work with my doctoral advisor, and called him up one day, and I said, well, what are you doing? You've got the Hudson Institute now. And he said, well, what are you doing? And what's your life like? And so I told him. And he said, I want you to think about this, but I think you should come and take my workshop. And it's a week long, plus like 10 days or better. And what it was really about life transition that nobody was writing about, no one was talking about. And that's how I got started.
And what year was this?
That was the year...
About
19...
In the 70s or the 80s?
No. 19 in the night. Let's see. years past.
Yes, okay, years past.
Yeah,
That's how I hold dates in my
more.
head.
It was more
Yes.
than 25 years.
Yes.
Like,
Okay. So this was before William Bridges and so on was doing
he was alive.
Yeah, but
And-
had he done his stuff on transitions yet?
Yes,
Uh-huh.
but I had the privilege of studying with him after Frederick Hudson.
Good.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
then he had a stroke,
Yeah,
and the rest is
that
history.
was-
Yeah, he was
yeah.
fabulous.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does the center do? What do you do?
Primarily, I'm doing research. I'm self-funded for 25 years now, and I decided not to tie myself to a university or an institute, primarily because very often there might be conflict of interest, not on my part, but the institution's part, like if they wanted to, support from a pharmaceutical. I don't want any conflicts of that kind.
Yeah.
So I decided to just go on my own. I know how to do it. And so I've been researching why do people live a long time, and what are those factors.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I understand that you also counsel people
I do.
on a
That's
one-on-one.
one-on-one, sometimes in big groups, sometimes in smaller groups, and so forth.
So you have been recognized as being a trailblazer, as the first female sometimes, and sometimes the first Asian American person. You've gotten a ton of achievements and awards. What message would you give to others who may be the first in their given field or in their group?
I think two things. One is a standard of excellence that you develop. It's not something somebody gives you or that you come born with excellence, but you have to understand what it means to have excellence as a person, as an administrator, whatever it is. So I think the whole standard of moral and ethics is very important as we develop as young people, and then eventually, like every time I sit down at a board meeting, it is about ethics, it is about morals, it is about people's lives. And so even with my medical science work, it is always about the patient, it's always about the family. So you always have to keep that in mind. And the other part that I always recommend is do the right thing, because you only pass through that gate once. And if you don't do the right thing, you will see it in your own work, that it was the wrong decision, the wrong reasons. Maybe, 5 years down the way, somebody will have to fix it. But be proactive. Be serious about the work that you're doing, because you have one chance to do that. It's this moment.
So what do you say about people who feel this incredible pressure or weight on their shoulders that they represent like a whole group or they're the first woman? How do you deal with that? And is that, can you share?
I can, because I've seen other people who look like me and also people of color or diversity. If you are not prepared for the job that you're going into, you should not take it. And so you have to be proactive, always be on the cutting edge about what you're doing in order to give back to the community and whatever it is that you're doing.
Did you personally feel, do you think, extra pressure because you were the first woman or you were the first Asian American woman, or did you just go in there, I know my stuff, I'm going to do the job?
Competence is competence. We all can explain what that is. Good training is good training. If you can anticipate issues, even better, good decision making. What I probably was not ready for was that most boards of trustees are not prepared to have somebody that doesn't look like them. And that was nationwide. because I was on national committees, talking about, how do
Not
women,
look like them, meaning that they were a woman?
a woman, gender, race, ethnicity, culture, language, all of the above. So I was very lucky because you know the other part of the story, which is my father said, I want all of you to learn English first, and I want you to be competent in doing that because you have to live in, an American way of life. So when I say the boards generally did not look like me, but increasingly it gets better, after some generation. But it's still, I think I mentioned to you that when I was selected to be interviewed, it always was, I was number one, right? But what happens in the process is not only does the board have to accept the diversity, but so does the whole system.
So you're talking about like a board of education.
The board of education or a hospital board,
Right, right.
but the doctors and have to be able to work with the people. People are better today than they were. But I would say that when it came down to what did I feel more different was that I was a woman.
It's interesting.
And not so much on race, because I speak English and
Right.
all of that. But the woman issue is really, can be you pull the shade down for those high-level jobs of CEOs and so forth. And so women have to work extra hard, or they have to be more like men. And back when I first started, we all wore suits.
Right.
And they were
Right.
navy blue suits, and I would look at my male counterpart and say, what kind of shirt color is he
Right.
wearing? And he would wear powder blue.
Right.
I went and got a powder blue blouse and my navy blue suit, and I'm
There you go.
Yeah, right.
There you go.
So, but the bigger part is that it's about people relationships.
Yes.
It always has been.
Yes.
It is,
Yeah.
do they like you? Do they like you because of your competence? Or if they don't like you, what is it that they don't like and so forth?
That's really, really good
Yeah.
advice.
But
So
gender is,
you
I
felt
still-
it was a bigger
oh
barrier
yes,
than
and
race.
still is.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
What would you like your legacy to be?
That's an easy one for me, and that is legacy is a, we used to say legacy is about, people who die, right? And what they want for, that which is to be continued. I changed my mind about that. Legacy is about today. It's about this moment. It's about our interaction. It's about, are we fostering greater relationships with the people that we work with or don't work with? And that a huge responsibility about if you want something to happen, you have to be able to work with people, right?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I wanted so much, and I worked very hard to bring the College of Marin Mini Medical School to Marin. Took me 17 years. I was relentless.
Yeah.
But I knew what it would take to do it. And the soil had to be tilled enough
Right.
in order for that to happen. So legacy is about this moment. Anytime you can enact something that's going to be beneficial to mankind, to the universe, to, whatever it is that you believe in.
What do you have, what are your hopes for the County of Marin, and what challenges do you think are the greatest challenges that we're facing today?
Let me start with my passion, only because it's easier to talk about. If seniors in Marin is described as a silver tsunami, that by itself bothers me, that we, characterize people with storms, right? And so there's no question that a great portion, the silent majority, are seniors, 55 and older, 50 and over. And I asked myself, is there a place for seniors in Marin County? Or are we going to be wiped out because we can't keep up with the cost of living, or that it's not welcoming? So I think that's one of our major issues.
Is Marin accommodating the growing
Correct.
senior population and providing appropriate
Not only services, but housing
and lifestyle
and changes in
and
housing
community connection.
codes and so forth. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much for being here today. I've really enjoyed hearing your story. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in.